is only the Anglican faith. She's no longer the chair of the Dunedin Interfaith. Opening the prayer. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Okay. Morena tātou. I'd like to start with a little karakia before asking Diane Bellamy. Prayer for us. I will start with a little karakia, a city of light. We are seekers after a city. We are keepers of hope in the night. With our feet on the ground, we lift up our eyes and build here a city of light. And that was written by Reverend Dr. Malcolm Gordon of First Church. And I've now asked Diane Bellamy, please, to say a prayer from the Interfaith Council.
Pauline's my sister-in-law and the talented artist.
Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Diane Bellamy. I am a member of the Dunedin Interfaith Council and the Anglican Church. So we now pray for peace in the world. Lord, we pray for the power to be gentle, the strength to be forgiving, the patience to be understanding, and the endurance to accept the consequences of holding to what we believe to be right. May we put our trust in the power of good to overcome the power of evil and of love to overcome hatred. We pray for the vision to see and the faith to believe in a world emancipated from violence, a new world where fear shall no longer lead men to commit injustice, nor selfishness make them bring suffering to others. Help us to devote our whole life and thought and energy to the task of making peace, praying always for the inspiration and the power to fulfill the destiny for which we and all humankind were created. Amine. Best wishes and blessings for your meeting ahead. Kia ora.
Kia ora and thank you. We have two speakers for public forum. I'd like to start with Madam Diana Struthers, who has some issues relating to Doctors Point Beach and Road.
Good morning, I'm Diana Struthers. My husband, Andy Stewart, and I have owned a property at Doctors Point for 35 years. We have, from time to time, lived in it permanently, for instance, all of this year, and he's been living there permanently for the last 5 years. Before that, we were living there for about 6 months of each year, so we're very aware of what happens at the beach and on the road at Doctors Point, because our house is the one at the top of the road. So is anybody unaware of Doctors Point geography? Anyway, the drive to the property is right at the top of the road, the hill that you go down to go to the beach, and it goes down to the left-hand side as you're going to the beach. So we are often taking our cars out or standing around pruning the exit or the trees over the road when the traffic is going by, and I think we'd have a better idea than most people of the dangers involved. Usually, if I'm leaving my car up because I'm going to use it again and I park on the other side of the road, I would observe 2 or 3 people who speed to the top of the road with no interest in what's coming up, and frequently they have to back because there is something coming up. I haven't observed any collisions, but there have been a lot of near misses. Children use the road and so do horses, and I can't imagine what would happen if somebody came to the top of the road when there was a horse almost at the top of the road. So the traffic and the usage of the beach have increased massively in the last few years since David Clark took a visit out there during lockdown and was punished for it, and it was on the national television news apparently, so all of New Zealand saw what a beautiful place it is and have wanted to go there ever since. So the situation has changed markedly, and it continues to change. It increases. So there is an ever-increasing number of vehicles driving down that road and also driving on the beach. Now, the Dunedin City Council has a bylaw, no vehicles on the beach, but as far as I know, it's not enforced, and I don't know how well advertised it is. Most of the people driving onto the beach are hoons, you could say. They're getting a lot of pleasure out of doing wheelies. Recently, I think there were some young men down there in cars over a period of about a week or maybe 2 weeks, and they gouged really deep tyre tracks in the beach all the way to the caves, and maybe even further. That was as far as I saw them. They were going across the land that's owned by the Waititi Beach Reserve Society, but they also sometimes go through land that's operated by the DCC. There is also an increased number of people camping and leaving vehicles parked overnight, despite the signage which our family made and has maintained ever since about 25 years ago. We do go down and tell people that they're not allowed to do that if we see them and it's a reasonable time of night. But it's possible that's becoming a more dangerous thing to do these days. There's also an increasing number of fires being lit, plants attacked, broken glass left behind, and general vandalism. And that reflects really the increased number of people from outside the area who are going there. I'm not saying local residents don't also do that, but we know that most local residents have some interest and care for the beach. So the increasing high speed and careless driving on Doctors Point Road and increasing danger to pedestrians and other road users such as horse riders is the main problem that most residents of Doctors Point see with the road. It's a very beautiful road. It would be a shame to spoil it with unnecessary signage, but really what is needed there is a sign such as is on the one-lane bridge, pointing out the fact that you're driving towards a one-lane road in a cutting. So it would be appropriate to have the arrows showing who's got right of way. Obviously the traffic coming up from the beach has. And to point out to people that they must be prepared to give way. We have, or various people have propositioned the council in various ways over the year, but the last effort that was made, I think in reply to one of your emails or something that people can send in to get action, was a sign which is supposed to represent a walking person at the top of the road.
Pointing at the clock, your 5 minutes are up, so if you could just wrap it up.
Right. So what I would like to do is, the action I would like is for the DCC to review the signage on Doctors Point Road and enforce the bylaw prohibiting vehicles on the beach. Sorry, I didn't realise.
Yes, thank you. I should have reminded you or made that point prior. However, we have some questions. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Ms Struthers, for coming along today. I actually know that road really well. My question is simply, has what you've just said to us now been fed through official DCC channels prior to this verbal submission?
Not recently, no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kia ora. Just wondering about the effect of the people driving on the beach and all the numbers on the wildlife there. I had someone send me pictures of penguins that have been run over, and I just wonder if that's something that's occurring frequently as well.
I myself haven't seen animals run over on the beach, but there have been many instances of situations that could really get out of hand with sea lions. So the signage on wildlife and the fact that the beach needs, because there's the possibility at any time that there'll be wildlife on the beach, there needs to be signage and education of people.
So is there not any signage at the moment about wildlife?
The DCC has 2 signs there, but they really are inadequate for a number of reasons. And one of the main ones is all the things that are prohibited are in a straight line. And you may know that signage is read best if it's bullet point. I don't think anybody reads it, and I've never seen anybody reading any of the signs. So they need to hit you in the face. Most people would only see them as they're driving. And the other thing is one of the colours of them, I can't see it in low light. And the other thing is they're so low that people throw their jackets over them, so then they're totally obliterated.
Thank you. Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Struthers. I'm wondering, obviously it's a very attractive area. Is it likely that the consented development at Willow Ridge and quite an increase in residential density is going to make the problem even worse?
It's going to make the problem a lot worse. There isn't sufficient parking for vehicles there as it is. And the locals are often excluded from the beach because the surfers have come first thing in the morning to go round to Canoe Beach. There can be a full car park at 8 o'clock in the morning on a good surf day. And one of the points I was going to make but didn't is we really need signage at Mickey's Crossing, warning camper vans that the area isn't suitable for them, that there may be no parking. On a good day there is nowhere for anything big to turn. I don't know what they do. I think they just sit in the middle of the car park for a while. But Mickey's Crossing would be the ideal place to stop traffic going down there that really isn't going to find a park.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Mr. Mayor, thanks for your presentation. I got 2 questions. One is, that road's unusual in terms of ownership, I believe, is it not? Is the end of it owned by the association and not by the council?
The map shows the road, actually, you know, the marked road on the map goes straight to the beach, in fact, all that way. All the other roads that are formed there, one is unformed and not maintained to the point. That is all on Beach Society land, and the road to the right to the car park is also on Beach Society land. The car park itself is on public land.
Thanks. And then the other one is, when the Beaches and Reserve bylaw was passed, there was no income put in for enforcement. So are you requesting that we consider income for enforcement on the beaches so we can enforce that bylaw?
Yes, I would say that is the obvious thing which I had not considered. I thought that the council merely needed to be reminded that they need to enforce the bylaw. But yes, I suppose it would cost money, and how you do it, I don't know.
Thank you very much. We have exhausted questions, so thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
And now we have Mr. Ashkan Ashraf from Coffee Muse, who wishes to talk about shops affected by George Street roadworks. Now, I'll just make the point that we have 5 minutes to speak and another 5 minutes for questions if there are any. And the 5 minutes is shown on the timer on the screen in front of you. And in order to, when you come to speak, you need to press the button to start it, which is already pressed for you. So you don't have to turn it off, but if someone else speaks, you need to repress the button to engage your microphone. Thank you. Now, just press it again. There you go. You're ready to go.
Ready to go? Lovely. Good morning. Kia ora, everybody. Thank you very, very much for having me here. This is lovely. I'm very happy to be here. Just to clarify, I'm no longer doing the coffee news, sadly. I pulled the plug. I've just got too much on my plate. So, yeah, onwards and upwards. But yes, I reached out not long ago to my friend Mandy. And I know Mandy because I used to play ping pong with her partner Lee out in Waitari, and I reached out to Lee as well, and I know Lee because years ago I used to be in the lighting business, as was Lee, and my family was, and that's how we know each other. So we've been in touch ever since. I just sent them a wee video saying, guys, I've just opened up a shop on George Street, and yeah, I guess if I play the video, it's 1 minute long, just or it might shed some insight on.
Easily fits within your 5.
You know, there's not a single soul in here. And I can barely hear myself think. If anything, this is a health and safety issue. So many issues. So I don't know how I'm supposed to afford to stay open. I need help.
Sorry, it's a bit dramatic, that video. Don't mean to come across as a negative light, but I guess all I'm saying was I just need help. That's all. And I didn't know that I would end up here presenting this video. I just didn't know, always upon, your recommendation for me to come here and say something. So here I am. Yeah, I was just wondering if there's anything that can help us stay afloat, considering the impact. I know it's lovely, it's great, and I can't wait for it to be all done. It's going to be awesome. But in the meantime, it's, will I be here to reap the fruit?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Perhaps there are some questions. Councillor Lucas.
Thank you. How long have you been open, and what time of the day did you record your video?
Peak lunchtime. Almost 4 months. Yeah.
Councillor Vandevers.
Have you been given any indication as to when that noise and disruption will end? Do you know when it's going to finish?
June, July next year is what I've been told.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Barker.
I think there's money in the budget for a marketing campaign for George Street. Have you had any interaction with the team over a marketing campaign? I've seen on Facebook and stuff that they've been promoting some of the businesses. Have you had interaction there?
Nobody's gotten in touch with me about that. And I've heard about it, but then I thought, no matter how much you advertise someone to go somewhere, would you want to go there and sit there with that blaring in your face?
Councillor Weatherall.
Thank you for your presentation. I definitely feel your pain from being a fellow retailer that's had to go through the experience. I even closed my store briefly. But back to compensation. What form of compensation are you looking for from council?
To be honest, friends, Fano, I was just wondering if there was any help available. Whether it's compensation or whether it's in the shape of a marketing budget, I don't know. I was just wondering. I'm just exploring, looking for options just to help us stay afloat and make it until next year. I mean, compensation would be a very practical option, but whether or not the council chooses to have that option available, I don't know.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for coming along today. And I just wanted to ask, you've owned the business for 4 months. What timing was that in relation to the start of the project in your area?
Well, interestingly, the very day I opened was the very day they started the project. However, which is impeccable timing on my part. When we first opened, the cash flow was good, and I had 4 staff on the go, and I just saw a steady decline, and it hit rock bottom, I think, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, Yeah.
So my question was really around the lack of contact, because that really surprises me. I'm wondering, given the change of ownership of the business, if there's been a disconnect for that reason. Have you had no contact with our project team?
Jed, I think somebody named Jed, who's on the ground there, has come in a few times and said hi and hello and asked us if we needed anything. Yeah.
And so you've communicated what you've asked, the questions of him?
Yeah, I just asked if there was something that we could access. Oh, I just asked for help, and he said he didn't know anything really, but he was there. He was paid to be there to answer any questions we might have. And yeah, I heard of a marketing budget from somebody, a customer that came in and mentioned it, but that's the most I've heard.
Thank you. And very quickly, Councillor Benson Pope.
Thank you. I'm glad you clarified that, because I thought you said earlier that you had no contact with the team supervising the job. Have you been down to the shop in the next block south to talk about your concerns and see what they can do about further marketing for you?
I didn't know I could do that. Yep, right on. Okay.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Cheers. All right. So in terms of the meeting proper, we have apologies from Councillors Ackland, Houlihan and Lofisa, and also an apology from Councillor Gary for the brief amount by which he was late. So I move that Council accepts all of those apologies. Is there a seconder? Councillor Walker. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. The agenda. Confirmation of the agenda. I move that Council confirms the agenda with the deletion of item 9, the draft zero carbon plan, noting that this report will be presented on the meeting of 25 September 2023. Are there any comments? Seconded. Is there any commentary on that? Commentary? Councillor Vandevers.
The reason for deletion of the carbon plan, there were some staff absences, but also the suggestion that there was no budgeting information along with the cost of it. Is that something that will be rectified when it comes back?
I'll refer that question to the Chief Executive.
Yes, so as councillors reviewed their papers, there was a suggestion that the planned investment scenarios that were signalled to happen in the next steps, probably in September, would be best considered alongside the plan was taken on board. At the same time, the 2 key staff members were unwell today. But I would say we will aim to have it to this. We're working towards getting it to the September meeting. It may be October, just depending on how the work goes on the option. So it will be September or October.
Any other comments? Okay, in which case I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item number 5, declarations of interest. Are there any changes or updates to the declarations? No? So I move that the committee notes the members' interest register and confirms the management thereof. Seconded, Councillor Walker. Any discussion thereof? No? So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Confirmation of the minutes. We have the minutes included from the meeting of 25 July 2023. I move that Council confirms the public part of the ordinary Council meeting minutes held on 25 July 23 as a correct record. Seconded Councillor Lucas. Would anyone like to comment or speak to that? No? In which case I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item number 7. Actions from resolutions of council meetings. Do we have any comment in advance? No?
Nope, happy to take any questions.
Any questions in advance? Yes, Councillor Lucas.
Thank you. For the Chief, in respect to your meeting with the Acting Vice-Chancellor in late August, I'm guessing, is that this week?
It's on the 31st.
Very good. In which case I'll move that Council notes the open and completed actions from resolutions of council meetings as attached. Do I have a second for that? Councillor Mayhem. Would anyone like to speak to that? No? In which case I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item number 8, the forward work programme for council. Is there any commentary in advance of the report?
Happy to take questions, Mr Mayor.
Are there any questions of the report? Deputy Mayor Barker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm just looking at the review of the strategic framework incorporating the sustainability framework, and I'm just wondering if we could also include in the report looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals as an option for the sustainability framework, please.
Yeah, that can certainly be considered as part of that report.
Very good. Any other questions? Councillor Lucas.
In respect to the Mosgiel heavy vehicle bypass, originally the report was signalled for October, and I see that's moved out to December. Is there a reason for that?
Councillor Lucas, we cover that in the RLTP document, which says that it will be included in that for the planning phase. Yeah, so there's really not a lot more we can say.
Are we done with questions? Yep. Oh, Councillor Gilbert. Yes.
Quick question on the Orokonui Eco Sanctuary. I'm just curious why there's a 3-month delay in getting a progress report, especially when I compare that to a little bit further down. We've got the performing arts, which is a much shorter time frame. It's about work undertaken a month earlier. Oh, sorry, work undertaken in July we're about to get a report on. So I'm just wondering why there is a 3-month delay in that.
Just let me check. I'm not sure that anyone here, because I'm sorry, I don't have that level of detail. Anyone here know? No. I will circulate an answer to that, Councillor. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Any further questions? No? In which case, I'll put the motion that Council, or I'll move that Council notes the updated forward work programme as shown in Appendix A. Do I have a second for that? Councillor Mayhem. Would anyone like to speak to that? In which case I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item number 9 is deleted. And moving on to item number 10, the draft speed management plan 24 to 27. Mr Drew and Ms Benson will come to the chair. Do you have any prefacing comments? No?
Happy to take it as read.
Very good. In which case, are there any questions? Councillor Vandervis.
We have for some time now seen quite a bit of evidence that if you lower the speed of an impacting vehicle, you lower the death and injury rates quite significantly. And there's been a lot of research on that. Have you had any research or have any data showing the negative effects of reducing speed in terms of causing frustration in motorists and the economic impacts on delays in travel?
We don't have any data to hand, Councillor, but that is something that I could definitely ask some colleague councils in Wakakotahi.
Thank you. Councillor Lucas.
Thank you. And just following up on Councillor Vandervis's question, do you have data on especially our rural roads, in terms of accidents and that they're speed related?
Yes, I do. I was just refreshing my mind this morning. So I do have that information specifically around the urban areas and the rural areas, that breaks it down into the 4 injury categories.
But that's not provided as part of our report here, no.
No, but if I think if the Chief Executive thinks that that's okay to provide to you, I can give it as publicly available information through the NZTA website.
And that's fine to circulate. And a lot of this material will be presented, I'm sure, as part of the hearings process to the panel considering it. Sorry.
My actual question was the reason for not looking at Mosgiel as part of these changes, and that's not proposed until 2027?
So I've just circulated an email as a response to those questions, but I'll summarise at a high level. Some of the community's main concerns we understand is Gordon Road, that's a state highway. So that will be done through a separate process from Wakakotahi next year, I believe, so that will be captured then. At the same time, some of the rural roads, there are reasons why some of those are being done in the way they are, and we've captured that. Janine can probably do more detail. Equally, the chair of the hearings committee has indicated that if folk from Mosgiel wish to offer views, then they can be fed through, and if they are more suitably directed to Wakakotahi, we will ensure that they end up there.
No, that's great, thank you. And in terms of the different coloured lines on the maps and where they change, that's already sparked a lot of discussion. Did they go and look at where those, at the roads themselves, or did they just go by the Wakakotahi guidelines in terms of choosing where the change in speed would go?
No, so as part of doing the speed management process, they have to go on site to have a look at, sight lines, amongst other things, to do an assessment of the road. I take your point about the lines on the maps. The maps themselves could be represented slightly better, but we're quite happy to work with the communities to try and explain that to them.
Thank you. So next we have Councillor Wiley, then members Weatherall, Barker, Gary, O'Malley and Walker. Councillor Weatherall.
Thank you. Question regarding promoting and publicising this. Obviously the ODT have done a couple of stories on it, and I see it again features in the letters to the editor, but to the wider community, is there going to be a wide engagement around this, encouraging people to submit on their views around this topic? So
as part of the consultation package, we will give some information about the why, in particular around areas where there's increased intersection risk.
We will promote on our various channels on social. There'll be active media releases and there'll be information on our website, but there will be, we will make sure that people are aware if they're not already.
Councillor Weatherall.
Thank you. These speed reductions on the map, it's been referred to as a blanket approach to speed reductions, but there seems to be some holes in the blanket in various suburbs. Could you explain some of those? Looking at it, I was looking at, is Mornington covered? Maryhill, Walkery, are they covered under these reductions?
So the gaps in the map are generally areas that already have reduced speed limits around them, so there is no change proposed and therefore needs to be no consultation.
But I noticed that speed reductions that's being proposed are around whole suburbs.
Yeah, so if you recall in the interim speed management plan, there were the schools and some around centres, and so the likes of Mornington have already been through the interim speed management plan, so no changes proposed there because it's already been through consultation.
So it's still not covering residential streets, off streets away from schools and those suburbs?
I'm not sure of the specifics you're talking about, but generally those areas that are grey, there is no change proposed because they've already either at a reduced speed limit or have been consulted on as part of the interim speed management plan. So you'll see all the schools, all the areas around schools are already greyed out because it's been through a process already.
Yes, I'm just thinking like Anderson's Bay has one school predominantly, but it covers the whole suburb away from the school.
Sorry, this?
From 50 k's down to 30 k's.
In this speed management plan?
Yes.
So as part of the Waka Kotahi guidance, it is suggesting that all of that area should be a reduced speed.
And I just remind councillors that what this is a document for consultation based on Waka Kotahi guidelines. We will now go out and consult with the community, and as happened in some of those other areas, following feedback, changes, and the committee will hear, changes will be made or won't. This is simply us applying that guidance and then having the conversation with our community.
Very good. Deputy Mayor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just looking at the GPS on land transport that's just come out, but I just wanted to understand the timeline. So does that not really, I mean, I see that safety's kind of devolved down to number 4, and so I just want to understand that GPS actually comes into being on the 1st of July 2024, so we are still under the operative government policy statement for land transport until that time, so that doesn't really affect what we're doing here?
Yes, that's correct.
My next question is just around changes in levels of service. When I look at the speed limit review, and there might be some changes in levels of service, and we've got that we expect St Clair to Octagon to take less than 15 minutes, and Mosgiel to Octagon less than 22 minutes, Waverley to Octagon less than 15 minutes. So with the changes, if there are any changes in the speed limit, will that timing align with our looking at our levels of service for the long-term plan?
We will definitely look at that in due course.
And just a question of to increase my knowledge, what's the fare rate for platforms, etc.? Because I've seen a lot of if speed limits were to change, that there would be platforms outside schools or just lower speed platforms. Do we pay for those, or does the government?
So the fare rate for infrastructure to support lower speeds, including platforms, is the 51%.
And my last question, I see the consultation's out for 3 weeks. Is that the usual time frame for a consultation like this?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I have 3 questions. The first one is, will this be supported by a national campaign by Waka Kotahi? Because the level of understanding within the community is not great.
That's correct. Yes, it will be.
Second question, I have noted that in the community there's this view that it's a fait accompli. We've already decided and we've come up with the idea, so we've talked about that just now, but the idea that it's fait accompli, I just want assurance that in our communication we will stress that this is consulting on and all of that. I'm sure we will, but I just wondered if you could...
Absolutely we will. In the communication we have put out to date, that has been the focus.
Unfortunately, it depends on how it's presented in the media, isn't it? And the final question is around statistics, accident statistics. I'm aware there's a bit of a delay between accidents occurring and the statistics showing up. And I'll just give you an example, one that I'm familiar with, and wondering how this fits. So I'm aware that since the 40k speed limits have come into being on the peninsula, despite people being feeling inconvenienced and frustrated, all that stuff, there have been no accidents at all in the last year. Will that statistic come through this soon? Or how much of a delay is there, Ms Benson?
It largely really depends on the type of incident. I would have thought a year for serious minor injuries would be a reasonable amount for that information to come through.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Mr. Mayor, I'll start with Mosgiel. It is on the map as grey, so it's not being worked out at the moment. And then State Highway 86 runs straight down the middle of Gordon Road. And I notice everywhere we've got a state highway that's grey, so it's not going to be done. So it says in the agenda that the state highway SMP program will kick on next year. Will we be able to take information in on our consulting program and then hand that directly to Waka Kotahi and ensure that can we get the lines of communication open that the community of Mosgiel is looking for something to happen in the State Highway SMP on this cycle? Do you think we can get that over to them and get it into their program?
Most definitely. I had a conversation with Waka Kotahi about that late last week, and ahead of their consultation period that will start later on this year, yes, we can compile that information and feed that through to them in a structured way that they will consider it as part of their speed management plan.
And I'm thinking of Port Chalmers in the past, and actually a lot of the work that we did out here around State Highway 1, we're often dependent on the State Highway to set the speed before we can set the speeds of the streets that feed into it. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Largely to avoid, if it's still sitting at 50 and we drop it for 50 metres either side, would go down to speed and then come back up to speed again, right? That's the reasoning. Thank you. The other question is, there's a lot of rural roads that are being considered here in this particular speed limit review, although I know some of them I've seen before. Is there anything that prohibits us from doing the consultation in some of the rural parts of the city as well as in the centre of town?
Not at all.
I'll approach that on my speech then. And then I do want to, in terms of expectation and recognition of this as a consultation document, I'm looking at Scroggs Hill Road and also Highcliffe Road and the bottom of 3 Mile Hill. Is it a fact? It is a fact. Is it a fact that in the last consultation there were proposed low speeds put on all those roads and then the committee did not accept those speeds once they'd got the public consultation?
That's correct.
So then it is correct then when looking at this is a consultation document that will take into account the feedback of the community before the final product is made. Thank you.
Good. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. 3 questions as well. Just in terms of preventing deaths and serious traumatic injuries, I'm assuming that the Waka Kotahi guidelines are simply following international best practice, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
Thank you. And going back to the often raised myth around reducing speeds reduces travel times, isn't it true that in urban areas in particular, travel times are affected by many other factors, for example, traffic lights, pedestrian crossings, etc.?
Weather, yeah.
Definitely worth remembering. And finally, I guess it feeds into Councillor Vandervis's question around research, of which I'm sick of reading this weekend. Are you aware of the very, very recent Auckland transport research that has shown in areas where they've reduced speed, they've actually found a 30% reduction in deaths and a 9% increase where they haven't? Are you aware of that research?
Yeah, that would be consistent with what we're seeing nationally. With the slower the vehicles are going, the less impact in terms of the trauma. Yep.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you. A couple of questions. The first one relates to the comment that's been made frequently that some of these recommendations actually reflect the practical operational speed of the road now. Anyway, is that the case?
Yes, that's correct.
Where that's not the case, what might we anticipate as after the consultation period in terms of enforcement procedures where that's necessary, given the issue that has been raised before by me and others about speed issues, red light issues and so on.
So I think one of the key things that we will have to do once we've gone through the hearings committee and it's subsequently been approved by council is to sit down with the police and go through that with them. So I think until I've had that conversation, I'd like to come back to you to confirm that.
But that conversation with the police would be something you anticipate ensuring happens, and we will hear in due course the outcome. Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Listening to an Auckland-based radio station over the last couple of weeks, I note that they're busy promoting it on their radio to the Auckland listeners, the same sort of process that we're going through. So is this being rolled out nationally, and a lot of the councils and regulatory authorities going through the same process?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. And so I have a final question. On South Road, outside the Carisbrook School there's a plastic speed bump. So as a temporary fixture, is there plans to use those as temporary installations, more of those as temporary installations, if it comes to subsequent to the consultation that they are installed outside other schools? Because I've had a lot of resident feedback, and especially from people in that area, about the harshness of that particular speed bump, whereas people don't say much about the permanent speed bumps, which have a steeper on-ramp and a lower gradient of off-ramp.
So the current speed bump outside of Caversham School is being replaced with a permanent one, and for the schools work that we're currently rolling out now, we do put infrastructure in to support those lower speeds where it is proven that it is needed.
And so do you have a timeline for replacement of that temporary one?
So we're in the market at the moment, so I would imagine probably this summer season.
All right, thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just following up from that question because it's not directly related to the item, but it has become up quite a bit. Is it true that the Caversham School Board and the Caversham School Principal approached the school for that speed bump, and that the feedback from traffic was that we wanted to wait to put in the permanent ones, and that we responded to a community request that a temporary one go in ahead of time?
That's correct.
And following on to engineering requirements and school speed reductions, is it true too that Wakakatahi has recognised that the budgets don't necessarily match in the speed calming requirements for schools to drop the speeds, and that in the past they used to require that for you to drop a speed around a school you had to bring in the calming engineering to go with it, but that was in fact slowing down the rollout, and that they have now allowed us to roll them out and then come back and look at the speed calming afterwards?
Yes.
Thank you.
Very good. I think we're done with questions. So thank you very much. We have Councillor O'Malley has moved the motion and seconded by Councillor Mayhem. So who would like to speak to it, starting with Councillor O'Malley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This actually will be relatively brief because this is the consultation document, and I think you must understand that going out to it. This is the document that's been put forward by staff who have taken into account the Wakakatahi rules for setting speed management. It then goes out to the community to be assessed, and the effects on things like travel time, safety, livability, all those things go into the final decision process. It is not a particularly enjoyable committee to be on because you will make people upset by the end of it. However, we've got to take into account all the balanced arguments that go into this. There is no doubt that reduction in speed does result in less serious injury. It's also an admission, although not necessarily a public admission, that a lot of the time we're doing speed limit reductions because we haven't invested in the infrastructure itself. Divided highway is still the best way to deal with a head-on collision. But if you don't have divided highways, then the only way to deal with it is to slow down the speeds. So this is a combination of trying to achieve lower fatalities and serious injuries in New Zealand, but also coupled with a chronic underinvestment in infrastructure in general. The other aspect of it is, as I said in the question section, don't take this document as this is going to just get a rubber stamp and go out the other end of it. The committee last time pushed back quite hard on a couple of speed limit changes and actually rejected them, and in fact came back with a suggestion of 70 kilometres an hour for some roads, and then Whakatahi said it's either 60 or 80, and that quite literally put a year on the process to sort that out between us and Whakatahi. Some of those roads were then kept at 80 because we basically decided 60 would be too slow, the committee decided. I cannot give an outcome on this because that would be predetermination, but I can say this: the committee will look at these seriously, and it's also my suggestion, and I think we'll probably do it, that we won't do the consultation just in the centre of town like we normally do. So many rural roads are involved here. I would recommend that when we do the consultation component, we design in it a capacity to go out to the rural areas such as Middlemarch, Waikawaiti, and the Brighton, Allington area in the process, because many of the people affected are affected in those areas. We will pay, and I will be paying attention to the balance between using the roads as you've been used to using them and trying to make these roads safe to use. That will be effectively the perspective I'll be taking when going into it. I encourage the public to get involved. The only way that we can have a good outcome here is to get good responses, heavy responses. If you are interested at all, put your interest in and tell us what you're thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lucas.
Thank you, and I'm reassured to hear from Councillor O'Malley the intention to take these hearings out to the communities, because the communities, judging by the response I've already had around my kitchen table in the last few days, is going to be large, and I think the communities will definitely respond and put submissions in. And I mean, some of the changes are very logical. I live on a gravel road which is 100 k's, and I have no idea why it is, and for it to be changed to 60k is very logical. But I do, I guess, take exception to Councillor Walker's earlier comment during question time. For me, with the current changes, because I live rurally, it will more than double the time for me to get into the centre of town. And so, I mean, I do think there is a productivity effect of which Councillor van der Vis alluded to earlier on. And for where I live, a lot of the issues to do with safety is actually in intersections where they are blind, and it's nothing to do with speed, as people actually just can't see. And I think that the communities will submit very strongly on this. And as Councillor O'Malley said, it's not, people do need to adjust how they're using roads, but there is, I guess, a balance between a blanket approach, which I take exception with. I think it needs to be looked at on a road-by-road basis in a lot of areas about what is the most appropriate speed for that. And I am concerned about, I guess, submission fatigue. It was alluded to earlier that, for example, 3 Mile Hill has already been submitted on, and people are just like, how many times do we have to submit on the same proposal? And I think we just need to think about that going forward. And yes, this blanket approach is not the best approach to address the speed issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We woke up this morning to an horrific accident, a tragic accident, and it's a good reminder about why this is being consulted on. It's a national campaign. We're noting it today, and it's going out for consultation, and we need to remind our community of the why, and that we will listen to the feedback, but that we're following Whakatahi guidelines. At these times, and already, I have detected a lot of frustration and the focus on inconvenience in feedback from the community, who for some reason think this is a fait accompli. And some of the feedback is not necessarily well informed. I have seen that. And I just want to give you that example. It's one I know well because I travel it every day. On the Otago Peninsula, when the 40k speed limits were put in after a long considered hearing by a hearings committee, there was a lot of noise over that process, and that continued for some time. Abuse even, I experienced some of that myself personally. And I was very interested just the other day to learn on very good authority that there have been no accidents in the past year on that road. Now that is exceptional. All the time I've lived there, I've not experienced that at all. That is an amazing result. And so I'm willing to be slightly inconvenienced and slightly frustrated. We've all experienced that at times. We've got somewhere to go and people are trying to live their lives and get on with them and get there quickly. For the greater good. And I guess it's around that education and understanding of why we are doing this and that we are required to do this. So it's very easy to support this because it's part of a process. Thank you.
Councillor Vandervis.
There are a number of difficulties that I foresee with this obsession with reducing speed on our roads. The first one is that most of these speed restrictions, I believe, will be unenforceable. The second is that what we used to have was a reasonable situation where New Zealand Transport Agency could reduce a speed limit only if the majority of road users actually conform to the new speed limit and not make something that made criminals out of half the people using the road. The fact that rules become more oppressive, more restrictive, more frustrating will, in my view, especially since enforcement will be impossible, will, in my view, simply make more Dunedin people break the law. I also wonder about the ideological idea that somehow we can save so many lives simply by introducing a speed limit which will be largely ignored. And then there's the real issue of if we were really serious about road accidents in this country, we would look to countries that have far greater experience of road accidents and that have accident rates of less than half of what we have here. And I'm speaking of Germany, where they have an extremely intolerant regime regarding drugged or drunk driving. You simply can't and don't do it there. Here we have people that have 7 and 11 convictions and are still on the road. That doesn't happen in European countries. And you also have a situation where you can travel the autobahns in Germany at 130 and some of them with no speed limit at all, and they still manage to have half of our accident limit, despite the fact that they have a couple of months of snow and ice on their roads every year, despite the fact that they have far greater traffic volumes, and despite the fact that they also have an incredibly large number of minor roads which are narrower and windier than ours. We still manage to kill twice as many people on our roads. If we were really serious about the accident rate, we would look at the impairment of drivers rather than this increasingly, obviously in my view, finance-driven idea that we can simply fine people into submission and through speed and stop accidents that way. I don't think it's going to work, and for that reason I don't think we should be going out to consultation with such an onerous and dramatic suggestion for speeds as a result of Waka Kotahi's guidance. And guidance these days from central government appears to me to be something that we're simply just forced to do.
Councillor Witherall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I intend to approach all safety initiatives with an open mind. I look forward to the public consultation process. However, I would like to highlight that Australia's road toll is getting towards half that of New Zealand's. Their suburban roads are definitely not better than ours. Australian drivers are not better than New Zealand drivers. Their speed limits are in fact higher than those of New Zealand. I believe it's not rocket science that their road toll is half of ours in New Zealand. Their fines for offending are much larger, and I think that needs to be looked at also. Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Although we're just noting the draft speed management plan for consultation, it seems that we've gone down the road of debating the merits or otherwise, so I'll do similarly, actually. I'll just correct Councillor Lucas. When I asked my question in question time, I was referring to urban roads, not rural roads. I made that quite clear, I think. I guess I mentioned earlier I spent the weekend doing a bit of research into this, and there's absolutely a plethora of peer-reviewed academic papers online from all over the world, actually, covering years and decades of documented evidence. So we're in a very strong position here that we can actually deal in facts and rather than personal speculation, which is really helpful for anyone in a government position anywhere on a council or a company. And as I mentioned in question time, there was a very recent research done by Auckland Transport Council up there, which is, is telling that where speeds have already been reduced, there has been a 30% decrease in deaths on the road compared to a 9% increase in deaths where they have not. I mean, it doesn't get clearer than that. Evidence on our doorstep. The why is simple, of course. I mean, it's in the heart of our papers. It's been stated around here many times. The chance of survival when hit by a car improves from 60% at 40 k's and to 90% at 30 k's. Again, glaring, clear, firm, solid, decades-long evidence. So reducing speed limits to 30 k's in urban roads such as high pedestrian zones, around schools, local traffic areas is urgently needed, and I think would be applauded by all of us to reduce deaths and serious injuries. I don't think anyone around here wouldn't want that. I'm going to do a wee bit of myth busting, because it's when you do read this on research from around the world, a lot of the stuff that I thought did exist actually is a bit of a myth. Other factors are more critical than just speed. Actually, that's false. All the international research tells us that speed is the most common contributor to road trauma. More common by far than alcohol, drugs, and fatigue. That was a myth that I didn't believe was true. Myth 2, going a few kilometres faster or slower doesn't make any difference to safety. Actually, it does. Speed can be the difference between a correctable mistake and a fatal error. Every extra kilometre increases the likelihood of someone having a crash. Regardless of what causes that crash, speed always plays a part. Myth 3, 30-kilometre limits increase journey times. In urban areas, journey times are affected by more than speed. Again, I raised that in a question time. Key factors include traffic congestion, we see that all the time, and time spent waiting at traffic signals and pedestrian crossings, and many other factors. One recent Australian study that considered a reasonably typical 26-minute journey to work calculated the difference between a 50-kilometre and 30-kilometre speed limit as less than 1 minute. Go figure, eh? Myth 4, 30-kilometre limits are anti-motorist. Reduced speed limits are not anti-motorist, and they are not about banning cars and the ability to drive. A 30-kilometre limit has a win-win-win for street users, businesses and motorists. And majoring motoring groups in most other countries around the world agree. Lower speed limits can lead to fewer car crashes, in turn reducing insurance costs and time delayed in traffic by those crashes. Ultimately, for me, sitting around this table, there's only one thing this paper means for me, and that's about following international best practice, and more importantly, about us saving lives and preventing life-changing serious injuries. It's also about, obviously, creating livable and thriving cities at the heart of what we want to do as a council, where walking and cycling comes with absolutely minimal risk. And it shouldn't just be about supporting lower speeds around schools for our kids. It needs to be about everyone, whether that be mums, dads, tourists, cyclists, local residents, or our vulnerable, elderly and disabled communities. This really isn't too much. It really isn't too much to ask. Yes, Mr. Mayor, I can see you pointing at the screen. To ask people to reduce speeds in order to prevent life-ending or life-changing trauma for an insignificant amount of time added to their journeys. That's the most perfectly timed speech I've ever made. Thank you.
Well done. Councillor Mayhem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your passionate speech, Councillor Walker. I'll echo some of Councillor O'Malley's sentiments. What we are moving is a draft consultation document. I'm going to keep an open mind, and I'll be encouraging all small communities and rural areas to please give their feedback to this, being aware it's only 3 weeks from the September the 1st. That's very soon. We know that slower vehicle travel causes less trauma in an accident, and we know that we want people to be safe. We also need to know how practical some of these applications are across the wider Ōtepoti Rohe. I'm encouraged to hear that we're going to be promoting why this is happening via Waka Kotahi guidance, and as we know, historically, this is a very divisive topic. It is a requirement for us to go through this process, and we've seen how relevant the school safety slower speeds consultation was. So please, I encourage everybody to have their say. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess the thing is that we are just approving this to go out to consultation, and this is mandatory. Waka Kotahi have put guidance through, and we are responding to that guidance. And that we have putting in place a hearing committee who will listen to the feedback and submissions, and as Councillor O'Malley said, there will be no rubber stamp, and I know that we've been through this process before, and the hearing committee have the power to recommend that we accept or reject any proposed speed limits. So I know people have terrible knee-jerk reactions to the speed limits, and I must admit to looking up to streets closer to mine and seeing what those speed limits are, and then I look at the reality of the speed that I actually travel along those roads, and those are quite similar things. I think the key thing is that people know their areas best, and they get out there and take part in this consultation. Although that's why I asked the question about 3 weeks. It takes a while for those messages to get through to people, but I guess that we have a lot of publicity around this, so people will be very motivated to engage, and I absolutely think they should be looking at their speed limit or their own speed in their cars, and just thinking about how realistic some of these are. The focus for us as council is creating a safe city for everyone, and in a perfect world there would be no deaths on the road. And then we look at the statistics which everyone has talked to about the damage that is done to the human body when people are travelling at high speeds. So we need to do everything that we can to make sure that none of those deaths occur under our watch. That is our responsibility. Just want to touch on what Councillor Van der Vis said about Germany, and Germany is a very different country to New Zealand. I'm going to say, unfortunately, they're a whole lot richer than us, but they also have a whole lot of infrastructure that is built for those speeds and make those speeds safer. And I think that was all that I really had to say. So I absolutely want everybody to give the hearings committee a lot to listen to. We all know our roads best. I think that will be a good process, and as Councillor O'Malley has said, it's not a rubber stamping process, it's a consultation and it's a conversation with our communities.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by reminding councillors that twice recently in this forum we've heard that parents are nervous about safety the safe passage of their children to school, largely because of bad driver behaviour on the way, lack of safety on the streets, and of course their own bad behaviour when they get to school, trying to drop people off or pick them up. So don't forget that, please. I think this is going to be hugely welcomed by the community, and I don't have any doubt that there's going to be a big uptake in the consultation. I know, for example, that the people who've been talking to me recently about some problematic streets in St Kilda will be in the boots and all around the consultation about speed changes and signage changes in their streets. And I know that the parents of young children in the streets near where I live will more than welcome the opportunity to have their say about what is ridiculous behaviour in many of our residential streets. I think this is a welcome consultation document. I think most of the issues have been covered very eloquently by colleagues. It's about best practice, it's about increased safety in our communities, and in many ways it's about an area where Dunedin can have another point of difference about good behaviour. I have a daughter who lives and works in Christchurch. I don't need to say any more. We don't have the problems that occur in other New Zealand cities. That's not a reason for us not further improving our physical environment.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I concur with many of the speakers in the fact that we need good engagement on this. And it's probably when I think of all the topics I've ever been hit up on, in the last few days, this would be one of the hottest. Don't tell me, make a submission. That's the important part. I am there to listen at the hearings panel to all submitters. So if you want to talk to me walking down the street about this issue, if you want to talk to me in a cafe about this issue, if you want to talk to me in the pub on the Friday night about this issue, that's fine. But you've got to make a submission. And that's why I'm very focused on how much we go out to the community as a council and actually lead people into what they have to do through this process. Because please don't come to me after the hearings process, after the consultation process, after the decision is made, and tell me what a bleep, bleep, bleep I am for being part of making that decision. If you submit, I will listen to you. If you don't submit, then you lose your right to come and go bleep, bleep, bleep at me. So I implore everybody, because I've been down this process more than a few times, submit, submit, submit. Tell your friends, tell your neighbours. If you've got a comment to make, do it in writing, please. Thank you.
Councillor Gilbert.
I wasn't going to, but the FOMO thing, fear of missing out, I feel I really need to reiterate what everybody has said, because I wasn't going to, because everybody has more or less covered it. This is something we are required to do, whether we like it or not, whether the community like it or not, we are required to do this. And in my opinion, this is just one element of road safety. There's distraction, red light running, cell phone usage, lack of indication, lack of awareness of who is around you, lack of understanding of how roundabouts work. There are many, many things that go into it, and this is simply one of them. And to reiterate, which is the only point that I don't think had been made, is just been made by Councillor Wiley. Don't come complaining to me either if you haven't submitted. If you want to actually have a say, to want to have your voice heard, there is only the one way, and that is submitting, because I'm going to turn back to my beer probably before I take too much flack if you haven't submitted, because that will be my first question to you. Did you put your voice forward? If not, thanks very much. I'll enjoy my Kilkenny. And if you did, then I'll absolutely take part in the discussion with you. But please submit.
And I better add my 2 cents worth that the submissions are open from the 1st of September till the 21st of September. You can access how to do it through our DCC website. And so if you want to make a submission, please do so. Councillor O'Malley, your right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm trying to come up with a term that has every councillor speak at it for an item. Starting out, and I think we've said it a number of times, this is a consultation document and it's part of a new national practice where every 3 years road controlling authorities are going to go through these speed management plans, and then they have to wrap them up into a regional speed management plan. So it's a brand new way of achieving this, and again, thanks for the geniuses in central government, we have decided to put this all on the same timing cycle as our LTPs, so everything's landing at the same time. Blanket approach has been used a few times, both in this chamber and in the national media as we jockey in the elections. Probably is true for the design. The design is taking into account the national standards and best practices, so therefore they're applied to the whole roading network. So you get the blanket design approach in the consultation document. The difference between that and what comes out is the consultation process, because that's when we can look at each individual road through the submitters and look at it under an individual lens. What you'll find, what I found in the past with these consultations, is that 80% of what's out there is consulted on the community has no opinion on, and it just goes through. But 20% of it, there's an enormous amount of community opinion as to whether that's a good or a bad idea, and that is the process that determines the outcome, is taking all of that. Don't come and talk to me, because that would get in the way of my role as the chair and not being predetermined before I go into the meetings. Talk to me in the meeting, though. I do want to hear from everybody. It is sometimes a little bit frustrating to see the same roads come to you in the second, immediately after they were rejected in the last consultation, but I have a feeling that is the process. The process is the staff are to apply the national rules to those roads, and then we decide whether we want to go with them or not. If we reject that, then obviously in the next consultation it'll probably be back there again in the same form for the committee to reconsider again. I do want to get into something else. This is largely coming out of the fact that we do not put enough money into our engineering of our roads. Councillor Barker touched on Councillor van der Vis's commentary on German roads and the autobahns, which is effectively what he was talking about. We have some 110-kilometre roads in New Zealand. They are well engineered to designed to be able to take cars that lose control and not hit other cars. When you've designed your road to that level, you can deal with accidents. But if your roads are not designed to that level, then you can't. The only tool left then is speed, and that is where we are at the moment. I want to call out State Highway 1 below Dunedin, though. It has come up at the Regional Transport Committee as a dangerous road. It's been identified and agreed upon by Waka Kotahi that it's dangerous, and they are putting money into safety extensions down in that road now. I just don't think it's enough. I think we need a divided highway at least as far as Allenton, if not as far down as Waihola, because we are having wicked head-on collisions on those roads. And what is the price of a life, you know? We're talking about the impact on how long it takes you to get to work. Well, it takes you forever to get to work once you've been killed. And you don't want to have to deal with somebody else's life that you took because of an accident you did. So we can't just be minimising the consequences of what these accidents are. There's no coming back from being killed. And so we need to take that seriously. And so we do have an ideological issue here. We have an ideology of accepting death as an outcome for convenience. That's a weird ideology. We've built it up over the years because we didn't think in the other way. So for the last decade, we've been thinking in the other direction. Should we be balancing the two of these? And as we start thinking about that, we start to slow the roads down. That's been the consequence of it. Not many people ask for a road to get sped up again once it's got to its new speed and people are used to it. They just don't like the slowing down component of it. And so, you know, we have to take that into account as we look at this consultation as we go forward. I can guarantee you some of this will be accepted and some of it will get rejected, and it will depend on the evidence that comes before the committee. And that in the end is what you have to have faith in. Assess us after the consultation as to whether or not we actually listened. And that's the point at which you make a commentary on whether or not this is a good outcome or not. This isn't the outcome, this is the starting document to get to the outcome. And I really, really, really say, if you are concerned about anything you see in this plan, you have to get in front of the committee to say it. That's the only place where you'll have an effect. If you just tell your mates at the pub, you'll have a great evening at the pub, but you'll have no effect. So come to the committee, come to these meetings and tell us what you think, and I assure you we will listen, and you will see it in our decisions. Thank you.
Very good. I shall now put the motion that you see before you on the screen that we note the management plan for consultation and authorise the Chief Executive to make any minor editorial changes. All those in favour say You want to have division? Okay. So by division.
Councillor Barker. Aye. Councillor Benson Pope. Aye. Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Gilbert.
Aye.
Councillor Lucas.
Aye.
Councillor Mayhem.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Walker.
Aye.
Councillor Weatherall.
Aye.
Councillor Wiley.
Yes.
Mr Mayor.
Aye.
Carried 11-1.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is number 11, the governance options for stage 2 of the future development strategy, submissions and hearing process. Mr Drew and Dr Johnson will speak to the report, or maybe we'll speak to the report. Any prefacing comments? Yes.
Pardon me, I just was just going to note a couple of errors in the report that I found. Well, one error I found in the report this morning, and one thing I just wanted to note. So in paragraph 17, it doesn't align with the recommendation. It should read one or two Mana Whenua appointments. Sorry, I'm not sure where that dropped out. The other thing to note is the council, the date that this may come to council in paragraph 23 apparently is still being considered.
Very good. So, questions? Councillor Vandervis.
I had noted 17, page 107, not aligning with recommendation B. Why have you chosen just now to go with up to 2 Mana Whenua recommended appointments when the body suggests 1 in the context of agrees proportionate membership? How is more than 1 Mana Whenua representative in any way proportionate?
Look, I'll answer that. There's been a lot of discussion since this report was drawn up and discussions with the OIC, but there will be 1 Mana Whenua representative on the panel.
So, in that case, we don't need to correct 17 as suggested just now?
17. What Anna was pointing out was the discrepancy between 17 and the recommendation. 17 correctly reflects the position with Mana Whenua.
So are we going to alter the recommendation B to match that then?
Council has to move something, but my advice would be that it approves it with 2 of each, and it says up to 2, but I can tell you, because that's what the ORC have moved, but we have an understanding that there will be 1 Mana Whenua representative on the committee.
Thank you. Sorry, I did have another question.
Yes, go.
Why is the recommended option on what is really a fairly far-reaching document, why is the recommended option that this very small committee have the power to decide rather than coming back, with whatever they come to, rather than coming back for a wider representative decision?
Well, I think the report seeks to outline the considerations that were made in assessing a number of options. The reason why option 1 is recommended over option 2 is one, it's normal practice for an RMA document to go through this type of process. So I guess a starting point is, what do we normally do? And it's normal to delegate to a hearing panel to hear an RMA document. We've done that through our plan variations, district plans. So that's recognizing that process. The second consideration really is one of timing in the context of this process amongst the LTP process. So we have a short window of opportunity to take the FDS through its hearing process ahead of the LTP. We are anticipating that we could get a significant number of submissions on that process, and so we want to ensure that we have a sort of a robust and efficient process. Having generally speaking, an important part of a resource management hearing process is the opportunity for panel members to question submitters and witnesses, and so obviously the more panel members you have, the longer that question time can take. So therefore, to run an efficient resource management hearing, you normally limit the number of hearing panels to a maximum of around 6, just because that question time can take a long time, and we've had a number of submitters on our last spatial plan, so it could be quite a long process to get through. So really, efficiency of process is a key part of that recommendation.
I'll jump in there. Efficiency of process is one of the key parts, but also a good, robust process with trained commissioners also helps, as opposed to elected representatives who may or may not be trained in the hearings process. At the same time, if you look at the diagram, elected representatives have an opportunity, once the panel makes recommendations, to consider how or what will be included in the long-term plan. And so that's the elected members' representatives' opportunity to look at how they might operationalise what is being proposed. And then following that, the feedback from the respective LTPs will then go back to the Joint Hearings Panel, and they will see what has or hasn't been funded, for example, or been considered by the elected members. So there's a different process where elected members feed into it more directly.
I get all that, but I still feel that it's very difficult to argue why elected members, the wider elected membership, shouldn't have the opportunity in the event of some really perhaps unusual decisions that might come out of this, to actually have a final say. It's most likely that they would tick off, or we would tick off, whatever was suggested anyway. The issue of timing, I think, is hardly appropriate. The issue of whether it's normal for an RMA decision, I think, doesn't really apply here either. I think it's very important that if this decision is going to stand and have real support, that as well as the committee making the decision or recommending the decision, that it should also be ticked off. Why wouldn't you allow that additional representative step?
You have two options in front of you, Councillor. Dr Johnson has outlined why staff's recommendation is that option 1 is the preferred option, but the other option is there, and should Council wish to move it, that option has been presented. But our advice is option 1 is preferable.
Thank you.
Okay. Questions, Councillor O'Malley?
Mr. Mayor, the FDS is taking on, the FDS is new, right? Would be fair to say. And it has a similarity to the old spatial plan, correct?
That's correct.
But the difference would be that spatial plans are not generated with high frequency, whereas this is going to be generated every 3 years from now on out, if this structure stays in place and future governments want to keep it going.
There's a requirement to review the need to refresh it every 3 years. You don't have to refresh it every 3 years. You can undertake that review and decide that it doesn't need to change. I think there's a requirement to refresh it at least every 6 years.
But it does mean that there's a chance to revisit it every 3 years. So if there was an aberrant outcome from one FDS, it could be visited within the next 3 year cycle, if councils felt so inclined.
Yes, absolutely.
Then the FDS still sits below the district plan, right? It won't modify the district plan, will it?
Well, it sits, I guess, above the district plan in a sort of a plan hierarchy point of view. It's perhaps more similar to the regional policy statement in that it doesn't have rules and it doesn't directly change zoning, but it sets a policy framework that the district plan changes will need to consider alongside all the other national policy direction and the regional policy statement. I think importantly what the FDS tries to do is link the land use change decisions with infrastructure funding, and so that therefore that you're not adding growth that you do not have infrastructure to service, and also that your forward planning for infrastructure needs is much more robust, so you don't end up with a need to add housing that you don't have the time or the finances to add the infrastructure for. So it's really very much driven around the land use infrastructure integration, which the other policy documents under the RMA suite don't deal with. So it's trying to connect the LGA and the RMA processes together.
That's very fulsome. So it's just really for the decision-making process in the room, and people getting a sense of what they're looking at here. There was, I think, recognised the central government, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there seemed to be a disjunction between formations of the infrastructure spends during the LTP and the spatial plans that had been generated for each territorial authorities. And this is a central government initiative to align the two together. Is that correct?
Yes, and it's part of a suite of initiatives in the National Policy Statement on Urban Development is the requirement around this. There's other requirements in there as well that are all part of the government's suite of changes trying to ensure that we don't end up with a shortfall of housing or business land into the future, and that we have the money set aside for the infrastructure requirements for that growth.
Excellent. Thank you. Deputy Mayor Barker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just in option 2, if all of the councillors were to be involved, so this is a joint ORC plus DCC document, would that add up to 27 councillors around the table trying to make decisions?
Yeah, that sounds about, I'm not sure of the numbers, but that sounds about right.
And can I just check, it would also include the mana whenua representatives on both of those committees as well?
Are there any further questions? Very good. Thank you. Now, I'd like to move then an amendment to the recommendation or to the motion that you see on page 99.
You shouldn't, Mr Mayor.
Should I?
If you change that,
yes,
then we will need to go back to the ORC. We need to resolve what they've resolved.
All right,
But
so
you
we shouldn't change it.
No, we shouldn't at this point, I don't think, only so that we've got consistent resolutions, but that is what will be given effect to as well.
Right, okay. So this is to do with having 1 or 2 mana whenua representatives, and so I'm advised that we should just stick with this recommendation because that will be, this motion, because that will be what will line up with regional council, but what will be given effect to is having 1, and that will give us the efficient panel of 6, as we have heard from Dr. Johnson. All right, so therefore, do we have a mover of the motion as it sits? Deputy Mayor Barker. I'm happy to second that. And so, Deputy Barker, would you like to speak to it?
I'm happy to move this as the most efficient route to doing what we have to do. The government has told us that we need to go through this process, that we need to do it with the ORC. I asked the question about how many people would be around the room in option 2, and that's 29, which we can all see would be completely clunky and inefficient. The key part of this is it's an RMA process, so I think that if we've got 6 people there, 6 or 7 people there, then that's an efficient way of dealing with it. I also note that it's normal to delegate to a panel to conduct the process, and we've just been through a process of talking about our speed limits review as well, so that it's a lot easier to get through this. The key thing for us, especially going into our long-term plan process, is that we align our infrastructure needs and our planning needs, so that when we go back to why is timing an issue, timing is an issue because we're about to head into our LTP and make decisions on our infrastructure. So when we look at the diagram that was pointed out on page 103, we do see that everything comes back to council, and we do have the ability to make decisions through our LTP deliberations that affect the infrastructure that then goes back to the FDS and feeds into that. So we are not losing control, we are gaining control, and we are doing what we are supposed to do along with the ORC. So the timing of this is absolutely critical as we go into to doing our long-term plan. And as Councillor O'Malley alluded to in his questioning, we do have the chance to come back and revisit this as well.
Speakers, Councillor Vandervis.
This is a new, overriding, very important policy framework. And I completely accept that it's appropriate for a small team of 6 people to come up with this framework. I would never suggest that we try to get 29 people to do that. However, given that this is an overriding policy framework and one which we will have to submit to, and given the possibility that this unknown group of 6 people may come up with something that could just possibly be bizarre, unworkable, or they might just have missed something, why would we give away our ability to do something about that in the event that something really undesirable came forward from this process, from this new process? Why would we as elected representatives give away our elected input into saying whether or not this decision is something that we all approved of? For me, this policy framework would have much more power and much more public acceptability if in fact it was ticked off by the 29 people that Deputy Mayor Barker has referred to. To give away our ability to essentially veto what could be a really awkward policy framework is to, I think, not do our duty as elected representatives. All of this could and should go through as planned in the recommendation, except for the idea that we don't get the opportunity at the end of it to basically say, yes, this is fine, and we all agree. It takes the recommendation as it is, where we don't get that right, takes away, I believe, an important democratic limit on pushing through a large overarching policy framework. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Just a couple of things I want to say. First of all, I've appreciated the joint workshops with ORC. I think that's been an excellent experience. Following an RMA process is familiar. We, of course, have experience in the 2GP and the formation of that and delegating that to RMA commissioners. Working to our strengths, we have considerable experience around this table from an RMA commissioner perspective, and we should call on that. And I'm more than happy with the recommendation that this is the most efficient and informed way to navigate towards the final future development strategy. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it was unusual that Councillor Vander was worried about the people on the group making crazy decisions, because 2 of us are in the room. And I guess what I'd say is I'll go back to my RMA Commissioner training, which says that you must take into account the quality of the argument in front of you, and that's your job. And if the commissioners are performing their job correctly, there's no reason to expect that this FDS outcome is going to be irrational and heading off in strange directions. It'll be a consequence of the process. It is quite literally an aligning that the government has recognised that there's been no aligning between spatial plans and the ability to fund them. And this is basically saying, have you correctly aligned it? It's not a transformative, it will not be a particularly transformative change in the city. It'll be going consistent with where our district plan and our spatial plan has been in the past. That's my anticipation. And certainly in the workshops that have come up to date, it doesn't seem to be any red flags arising. I don't know why we have to go to the darkest outcome to determine whether or not this is a good idea or not. I think you do need to put some faith in the joint hearing panel. And as I said in the question, or as I asked in the question and got clarified, this is coming up now every 3 years. This will be a relatively common occurrence. It will be always, before you do your LTP, make sure it's aligned to your spatial plan. That's all the FDS really is in the end. And also to the extent of the wording of the resolution, up to 2 means that 1 is perfectly acceptable. So it doesn't need, the other 2 are quite explicit, that is 2 from each of the ORC and the DCC. We've heard from Dr. Johnson that this is a standard practice for RMA activities, and I think that's the issue really. I mean, option 1 and option 2, they're not all that far apart, practically speaking, but we do actually do our RMA stuff more consistently with the option 1, so I'm happy to go with the option 1 in that regard. And again, the real big one here is you can revisit in 3 years, and it's the FDS. We've still got the LTP to determine whether we're funded or not. If someone said we're going to fund FDS puts a airport in the middle of the harbour, and we turn around and go, no, we're not going to build it, then it goes back to the FDS and it doesn't get done. So there is an internal check coming in here, which is the LTP outcome will determine whether the FDS can actually get executed or not. That's where you'll have your level of control if you genuinely feel that something spurious has occurred. Otherwise, this is really just another one of the things we have to put in place to be good government and have a good relationship between local government and central government and our ratepayers. Thank you.
Very good. We have exhausted speakers. So, in which case, I know you're right to reply. Yes, indeed.
Well, Councillor O'Malley did it so eloquently that I don't really need to say anything apart from the council members brought up knowing the group of 6 people. We will know 2 of those people because we will be appointing them from around the table, and I think that everyone will be RMA trained. So there is that. I was going to say severe training. There is a lot of training that goes on in the RMA process, and this is about making sure, I think as Councillor Gary said, that we assess the evidence. This is the most efficient method of doing it. It will be ticked off by the 29 people through the process because it will go to the ORC, it will come to the DCC, and I think as Councillor O'Malley alluded to, we will have the final power about whether we actually recommend to fund any of suggested infrastructure or not through the LTP. So I am comfortable with this process. It's a new process, so it's always a little bit challenging, but the most important thing is to align this with the LTP so that our infrastructure decisions, where we're planning to put stuff, actually lines up with our infrastructure decisions about where we're planning to spend to put stuff.
Okay, I'll put the motion and we'll do it by division.
Councillor Barker.
Aye.
Councillor Benson Pope. Aye. Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Gilbert.
Aye.
Councillor Lucas. Aye. Councillor Mayhem.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Walker. Aye. Councillor Weatherall.
Aye.
Councillor Wiley. Yes. Mayor Raddick.
Aye.
Carried 11-1.
And I'll just remind members it's helpful to turn your microphone on for the vote because then it is recorded on the system. Thank you. We have item 12, revocation of the food grading bylaw. Ms. Austin and Ms. McGill, do you have any prefacing comments?
No, take it as read, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
I wonder if you could clarify something for me. We're all familiar with the letters on the cafe front or the restaurant front, A through. and we have really high numbers of A. But I don't understand this new system and how that looks. Do we notice any difference with that? Can you explain that? Because I didn't understand it in the paper.
Through the chair, yes, this system's been going since 2015, so it's not new. We've just been running them in parallel. So we're not required under the Food Act to have a food grading system. And we do grade the premises under a different system to what is required under the Food Act. So with this being revoked, we wouldn't have the A, B, C in the restaurants.
So how would the public know where the business sat in that regard?
The Food Act requires very high stringent standards, and they can be assured under that we are overseeing the food safety very well, and if there's any doubt, they won't be operating or they'll be visited more frequently. So the public can be assured that it's well run.
So if they're operating, they're at a high standard, is what you're saying. And am I right in remembering that we have at the moment, a very large number of A's?
Yes, we're looking at over 90%, and we've seen an increase in those numbers since the new Food Act came into place.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gilbert.
Thank you. Just a couple of very quick questions, and I know I am simplifying this a little bit, possibly a little bit too much, but for people who are unaware of the new system, would it be a fair comparison to suggest that it would be akin to competent, not yet competent, or safe, not quite? Would that be a fair comparison?
The terminology that's used in the Food Act is compliance or non-compliance.
And with the program, has there been, is it a national move towards this, or is this more of a local? I know you said it's a national system, but is there a move within the food industry nationally towards this?
Councillor, just to remind councillors that we're required, the Act supersedes the bylaw, and so we're required to revoke the bylaw.
Deputy Mayor Barker.
Just want to tease out there's a disadvantage there, potential dissatisfaction from food business operators in the public, and then would that be because they might think that they might get more business because they get an A? Is that the thinking behind that disadvantage?
Historically, the food businesses have enjoyed having the grading in the window. However, we've been talking to them recently and they don't see any issues with the change.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervis.
Oh, just foreshadowing, happy to move.
Are there any other questions? No? Very good. So it's been moved by Councillor Vandervis, seconded by Councillor Gary. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Vandervis?
The revoking the bylaw will mean that staff will continue to use only the MPI criteria. To me, this is one bit of centralisation which makes imminent sense and hopefully simplifies things for staff and for food outlets.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Gary.
I just want to note that we have such a high standard in this city, and that's something to be exceptionally proud of, and just to acknowledge the work of the staff in that regard.
Thank you. Any further comments or right of reply, Councillor Vandervis? No. In which case I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Item 13, proposed event road closures for next month. Mr. Drew, do you have any prefacing comments? Are there any questions? Yes. So,
happy to move.
Happy to move. Are there any questions? What's the question? There are no questions. You're excused from sitting down. So we have moved Councillor Vandervis and seconded, I presume, by Councillor Benson-Pope. You happy with that? Very good. So would you like to speak to it, Councillor Vandervis? Councillor Benson-Pope? Anybody? Done. Okay, in which case I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. The next item is number 14, the Masters Games CCO exemption. We have Ms. Wakaira and Ms. Kistela. Okay, I'll just see, are there any prefacing comments? No? Questions? Are there any questions?
Happy to move.
No? So question? No, it has been moved by Councillor Wiley and seconded by Councillor Vandervis. So there's no questions. Come back. Oh, sorry. Do you have a question? Sorry. Hold it.
One quick question. Given the fact there were no questions on this, it indicates that this structure, in the eyes of the council, can work quite well. Have we considered any of the other CCO structures that we have, and I'm thinking Dunedin Railways in the future, as whether or not we could look at this kind of structure for things that don't have a for-profit term, but they do a social and economic impact?
As part of the investment plan, we are looking at how some of those companies are structured. It's a conversation. I'm just not sure that DRL will meet the criteria.
Yeah, and I'm not asking for an answer on that, but really, you can see the feedback on this is that this is a good structure. Yeah.
So the answer is yes. We are looking at the structures of the commercially driven companies.
Thank you. Oh, well, that was good. It was worth the walk almost for a question. Right. All right. So the motion is on the screen in front of you. So there are no speakers to the motion, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. And so the next resolution is that I move that Council move to non-public, to exclude the public for the next part of our meeting. And I don't know that we'll start yet, but anyway, is there a seconder to that? Councillor O'Malley. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried.